Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 63 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. This week's tip: use the PowerPoint online photos function. One of the really cool things in the latest version of PowerPoint is that it easily supports pulling in pictures into your slides. When you use a PowerPoint layout template, most of those content blocks allow you to support text or images or objects or online pictures. When you click online pictures, what it does is it opens up a separate dialog box and lets you actually search for pictures on the internet. And it actually pulls up images by default that are licensed under Creative Commons. So you can go ahead and just click that image and it will put it directly onto your slides. What's really cool, though, is the huge variety of things. You can just put in whatever search term you want, and it will go ahead and pull up relevant images surprisingly well. And you get a variety of images, everything from photographs to graphics to things that just look like they're hand-drawn to all sorts of different things. The bottom line here is that if you've got this latest version of PowerPoint, there's no excuse not to include images on your slides. All you have to do is hit that Online Images button and you're all set. If you're working freeform and not using a PowerPoint layout or not using any of those layout guides, you can still insert images this way. In this case, just go to the Insert menu in PowerPoint and choose Online Images from there. And it will pull up that same box and let you, again, easily search for and pull in the pictures that are going to help you make the point that you want to make. Stick around. And after the break, I'm going to talk about 6 observations I have from a recent talk that I gave. Welcome back. Earlier this evening, I gave a talk at a local stroke support group. Been doing a fair number of these at the group that I manage, as well as just participating in some other groups. This one, I knew several weeks in advance I was going to be the scheduled speaker, so I had some time to think about the things I was going to talk about. Overall, it went fairly well. It's always interesting to get up in front of these groups and see exactly how the message is going to land. Ultimately, this one was fairly well attended. We had about 12 to 15 people there, which is generally what I'd consider a fairly small audience, but for a support group, that's actually pretty well attended. Today, I want to talk about, just sort of 6 observations I had from conducting this talk and preparing for it. Those 6 observations are that PowerPoint has good templates these days. Second, it's easier to iterate in an outline. Third, that listing images before building slides helps. Fourth is that I need to watch out for dark graphics. Fifth is that filler words tend to disappear depending on context. And sixth is that you don't know what you have until an audience hears it. So let's get started. First, PowerPoint actually has some really good templates. Now, I'm certain most of us who use PowerPoint have opened up the application and you see a number of templates there on the screen the first time if you go to create a new slide deck. But there are actually a lot more slide templates than those. There is a search box on there, and you could just type in whatever theme or idea you want for your slide deck. Now, with this talk before the support group, one of my goals was to promote my other podcast, Strokecast. So I wanted something that was going to look similar to some of the imagery I had there. So I searched for heart, and I came up with a nice medically themed template with great red and white background with really simple background images and design. And it was really just perfect for what I needed. There are a huge number of different templates that are out there. So when you're going ahead and creating a new slide deck and you don't already have a corporate or event template you need to build from, start by checking out PowerPoint's default templates and then go beyond that. Type a keyword or a topic or an idea into the search box and let PowerPoint search for different pre-built templates. And then PowerPoint will simply download that template for you and lets you go ahead and create your own slide deck. It can be a really powerful tool to get started very quickly. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of iterating in your outline. Now, this is a theme I come back to a lot, and that's that building your slides should be one of the last things you do when you're preparing for a presentation. You want to do as many of the changes and updates in your outline as possible. And with this talk, that's what I ended up doing. I didn't really have a predefined topic that they wanted me to talk about, but I was listed on the agenda as a stroke survivor and a podcaster, so I figured those are probably the two things I should really focus on. And I began building this presentation with the idea that maybe what I'll do is I'll talk about 10 things I learned from the hospital or learned from my experience. And I started out by listing as many different things as possible. I think I stopped when I got to about 25 or so on the list, and I figured I'd go back and choose the best ones. But as I went through that, I realized this doesn't really lead to a particular goal. So it was a question of what is my goal for this talk? That led me to go ahead and further refine that. And then once I had my goal and my calls to action in place, the key things I wanted to make sure I landed, then I went back and looked at the content that I had. And I saw there were a few good things in there that I could go ahead and pull forward, but I still needed to ask myself, why am I sharing this? And after reviewing that and trying a few different configurations, ultimately it comes back to another one of the main themes I talk about in this podcast, and that is storytelling. So through this process of iterating and changing the outline and reflecting on the goals and the calls to action and what I actually wanted to accomplish, I ended up landing on the idea of talking about storytelling as a powerful tool, about how podcasts work as a storytelling mechanism, and about how stories can help us illustrate the ways to get to our goals. All of that was before ever opening PowerPoint. But by iterating like this and by building everything like this, I had this whole outline of ideas and content before I began opening the tool. And then I could go to the next step and start listing out what each of those slides might be. And that brings me to the third observation, and that's that listing images before building any slides does help. This is something I haven't done deliberately in the past. I've collected bunches of images that I probably want to talk about, but I took a more deliberate approach to my images for this slide deck. I went through and I looked at each of the points that I was trying to make in my outline and listed out what images might be good to support that point or to illustrate that point. And then I ended up with a list of approximately 20 different images or pictures or graphics that I might want to include. By building this out beforehand, I now had a plan of what I might want to do with these pictures. It meant that I could make the slides fit the visual story that I wanted to tell, instead of trying to force the pictures to fit the slides. So by building that list out ahead of time, it again made the ultimate process of assembling slides a lot smoother, and it let me break up the tasks into separate parts so that I could first go ahead and actually start collecting those images all in one place before I opened up PowerPoint. The fourth observation is that it's important to watch out for dark graphics. And I actually sort of got burned by this twice in 3 days. I really should know better. This is kind of a rookie mistake, but we all still make those from time to time. In a different slide deck that I used earlier in the weekend, I used PowerPoint's designer functionality to go ahead and create some cool looking slides. And the designer functionality does come up with some really neat design ideas. In this case, one that it chose was to take a screenshot of a web page that I wanted to talk about, and it turns it into a background image for an entire slide and then put a transparent gray box over it. So it sort of grayed it out a little bit, but still let it come through, and then put a headline on top of it. And it did look really cool on my monitor. The problem is I wasn't going to be using this slideshow on my monitor. I was going to be using it with a projector and a pop-up display screen in a room that was not completely dark. So while it looked good in the prep phase, when I actually went ahead to use it, the contrast wasn't nearly as sharp as it needed to be, and that background image of that web page got almost completely washed out and ended up becoming illegible. Now, I got through it because it wasn't absolutely critical that I have that graphic, and so I was able to sort of make fun of my own stupid mistake in that case, and so that still went over well with the audience, but it did make the slide itself less effective. And the same thing happened with the presentation I did earlier this evening, only in this case it wasn't using the PowerPoint Designer functionality. It was a limitation of a screenshot from an episode of the 1980s Twilight Zone. And that episode was a very dark episode, so there really weren't a whole lot of other options for the graphics for what I wanted to accomplish with this slide. But again, it was a case of a projector shining onto a screen just does not give the same contrast that working on slides on my monitor or on my laptop screen do. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. Just because it looks good on the LCD panel on your laptop or on the monitor on your desk does not mean that it is going to look good when projected in front of a conference room. And it's so easy to forget that. That's also why, whenever possible, you also want to go into the actual environment in which you'll be presenting and doing a dry run and doing an actual full-on run-through of all your slides so you know how everything looks in that environment. Unfortunately, that is not always possible, but when it is, it can give you some valuable information. The fifth observation I have is that filler words tend to vary a lot on context. Filler words are words like and ah and like and those other meaningless words that we just throw into our sentences as we're waiting for our brains to come up with the actual words for our next thought. They can be a challenge to deal with and to try and purge from what we're doing. We have this natural tendency to want to fill those spaces while we wait for that next word. And we all do it from time to time. I still do it. And what's really interesting, though, is that I do it a lot more when I'm recording this podcast or recording somebody else's podcast than when I'm actually presenting. When I was standing up in front of that room, in front of that audience, and making my points and telling my stories, the ums and ahs just sort of disappeared. As I go ahead and record this episode, there are still several in there. Some of them you'll hear, and some of them I'll cut out. When I work with guests on the podcast, there will certainly be ums and ahs that pop in from time to time that just aren't there when that same guest stands up and presents and speaks. So what's interesting about this is just how different the context becomes and how that different context influences how we fill that space with words and sound. I'm not sure there's a whole lot actionable there, but it is an interesting observation, or at least it's mildly interesting to me. The final observation I have from tonight is that you don't know what you have until your audience hears it. Prep work is obviously so essential to building out a successful presentation. 90% of your success is determined before you even begin speaking. But until you actually talk to that audience, you don't really know how it's going to land. Actually, speaking to the audience lets you know when your presentation is lagging, when your pace is off, when you're making too many assumptions about the audience. And actually speaking with the audience really highlights what actually impacts them. You can see it in their faces, in how they respond to what you're saying or how they drift away when you're talking about something they have less interest in. The thing is, as you present with your audience, you want to watch and listen to them. In order to be able to observe your audience, of course, that means you have to know your stuff. You have to have done your prep work so that you are comfortable with your material. But watch and listen to them. Figure out what they're responding to and what they're not responding to. That doesn't mean you have to change everything based on that. It's just a point of data because every audience is different. The audience reaction can be affected by everything from the time of the presentation to the place to the background of what's going on. What is the broader news context that audience is dealing with, whether that's actual mass media news or whether that's just news within their organization. How is that impacting their mood? How do the demographics of one audience differ from another? Or how do the psychographics of one audience differ from another? All of these things are going to impact how the audience responds to what you're saying. So make your observations across multiple audiences to draw any conclusions about things that really don't work or things that really do work and that surprise you. Individual anecdotal reports that you observe will help you prepare. They'll help you not be blindsided by an audience response in the future, but they may not require actual changes. Those actual changes will be more dependent on the broader trends you observe as you tell those similar points, similar stories across multiple presentations. Because ultimately, it is all about your message and your audience and how your audience responds to that message. So that's it for this week. Those are the 6 observations I had from this talk that I just did. And that's that PowerPoint has good templates, that it is much easier to iterate in your outline, that listing images before building slides helps, that you have to watch out for those dark graphics that will look different when you present, that filler words do vary based on context, and that ultimately you don't know what you have until your audience hears it. So what are your thoughts on these observations? Go ahead and share your observations at 2minutetalktips.com/observations. Are there topics about speaking you would like to hear more about? Let me know. Go ahead and email me at bill@2minutetalktips.com. Have you checked out the Alexa skill for 2-Minute Talk Tips? Go up to your Echo device or the Echo device of some random person you happen to meet and say, Alexa, enable 2-Minute Talk Tips. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. I'm Bill Monroe. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.